Thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar on organic mushroom production. Today we have with us Dan Moe here from the farm of Minnesota to talk more about his experience growing organic mushrooms. This webinar is supported by the USDA Transition to Organic Partnership Program. The TOPP program in South Dakota is administered by OCIA, or the Organic Crop Improvement Association, under a cooperative agreement to the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association, and it aims to support farmers in transitioning to organic farming. Today we have an hour and 5 minutes set aside for this webinar, and we'll have time for questions at the end. But feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature if you want to send in your questions during the presentation, and I'll be watching to make sure we have them all answered. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan and get those slides pulled up.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, why don't you start with the first slide there, which is just this is my logo and my farm, and it's just there's not a whole lot of story behind the name of the farm, and I'm trying to be arrogant about being the only farm in Minnesota. It's just my grandfather started this farm years ago, and my wife said to me when we were coming up with the name, "We've never called this anything but the farm," and so that's why it's called the Farm of Minnesota. So next slide, please. So this is my rendition of trying to be thought of maybe as a mushroom man, which I'm not. I do many different things. Mushrooms is one of the things I grow. I don't specialize only in mushrooms, even though you can make a very good living specializing in mushrooms. And but being certified organic, which we'll talk about more in a few minutes, is something that is unique and has an awful lot of market potential. And so those of you that are thinking maybe about transitioning to organic and things, congratulations. There's room for you at the table. We do not have enough organic farmers in the world. In the United States, we need at least another 50 million more organic vegetable farmers and organic mushrooms too. Next slide, please. So here I'm just showing, I've got a collection of a few things. I do grow several other things. I did try animals for a while. These are some Toulouse ducks or geese, excuse me. And then the next slide here shows some of the different chickens and things that I tried. And I'm just not a very good animal farmer at all. And it's part of the problem is that they don't stay put and you can't plant them. And there's all sorts of things with that. And so I generally have given up on all the different animal products, even though there's a lot of benefits. Next slide, please. And then I grow an awful lot of garlic. I love growing perennial gardens, perennial works. And so there's other things that are important to me too. And what I need at my age is just something that's simpler. And so that's where mushrooms kind of came in. I've been growing mushrooms since 2018. And it's just something that married quite well with everything that I do. And I do some direct marketing. I do sales to wholesale accounts. I do sell to schools. I sell many different customers buy all the different products I grow, and mushrooms being one of them. Next slide, please. So this is a season extender here showing that we try to grow food year round, partially because here in Minnesota, we don't stop eating in January. So why should we stop growing food in January? And so those of you that might be in the warmer climates, this may not be an unusual factor to you, but here in Minnesota, we have this unusual season called winter, and a lot of things don't like to live through winter. And so we have to have these season extenders. Next slide, please. And then this is just another one of our crops that we grow in the summertime. This is some green beans here with some carrots in the middle and those type of things. So we utilize our season extenders all year round. Next slide. And then this is a crop that I do a pretty good job on. I'd like growing multiple different colors of things, multiple different things for health, nutrition, and everything else. And again, that's where some of the different focuses you can choose on with mushrooms. Next slide, please. This is my grandfather and myself and my cousin. He's the one that kind of contaminated me, and I fell in love with farming in 1967 here on this farm. And so when I moved back here in 2000 from California, because my parents got tired of the snow, and I had an avocado ranch there for 28 years before coming here, I looked around the farm and saw, corn soybean operation from the renter that we had running the farm, and said, this is wrong, because Grandpa had 7 different crops on this farm. And so why do we need this? And then quickly you do the math and you do the studying and things, and you discover that you can't make a mortgage payment on just 160 acres of any one thing today. Like Grandpa gets to grow 40 acres of corn and make its mortgage payment for the year, and we can't do that today. And so you have to think outside the box. Next slide, please. And this is my parents. My mom is the one who grew up here, and they're still alive, and they live on the backside of the farm with me today. So I'm just honored and blessed to have them with me. Next slide, please. So I am certified organic. And so becoming certified organic is kind of a lot of people ask me, how do you get there? How do you start that? And my first answer is you got to change the farmer's mind, because the problem with organics is that when we incur a problem, we have a project that we have to work on to solve that problem. The conventional farmers, when they have a problem because the chemical companies decide at the end of World War II they need a new customer, have the solution in a bottle. And so they reach on the shelf and they grab their bottle and they solve their problem for that day. But then tomorrow that problem comes back, so they have to go back and get the bottle again. And that's an expensive operation. Organically, you might even incur the same problems, pesticides, funguses, different contaminations, all these different things. And to solve it organically requires you to think and requires you to work on, why is this problem here? And so, for example, in vegetable production, you generally have aphids or some sort of insect predators. And so why are the insects attacking your crop? Well, Mother Nature put insects on the planet here to eliminate poor and stressed crops. And so then why are they attacking your crop instead of the weeds that are in the ditches or things around you? Well, it's because your crops are a little bit more digestible than the weeds. And so the perfect example or perfect solution to that is to raise the brick value or raise the integrity of the sugars in your crops, so the weeds or the insects have someplace else to go, and they want to get rid of the Canadian thistle or get rid of the giant ragweed. I didn't pull up a picture because it wasn't in my computer to find, but I do have examples on my farm of 10 caterpillars being on a weed and not being on a tomato plant, or aphids covering up weeds and not covering any of my other crops. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So also I'm Real Organic Project certified. And what that means is within the world of organics, there is kind of a fight. And so because of the money involved, an interesting little fact is the United States is the #1 largest producer of produce in the world. Generally speaking, what's the #2 country? And the question or the answer hint is that country's the size of Connecticut roughly. And so the answer is that's the Netherlands. And why is it the Netherlands? Because they grow things hydroponically. Now there's absolutely nothing wrong with hydroponic food, but being able to certify hydroponic food as organic food is an oxymoron in my mind, because the foundation of organics is the soil biology. And so when you have the soil biology in growing crops in the fields, which is what Real Organic Project is all about, is you're certifying that that's how you grow all your crops. And then you have this organic certified operation that has everything in a sea container or in a warehouse or this, that, next thing. That is an organic or hydroponic operation, excuse me. There's no soil biology there. And so how do you get that certified organic? And so then next slide, please. So then that then says to yourself, okay, we're going to grow mushrooms in a enclosed environment. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble moving.
Okay, that's fine. So then you look around and you say, I've got this problem. And so you got to ask for help and everything else. Because I just said that everything organically has to be grown in the soil to have the soil biology. And so how do you grow mushrooms in a controlled environment year round and still meet all the organic requirements and things that I'm talking about? And part of that is that we have to remember that there's two types of mushrooms that are grown commercially. And so you have the mushrooms that are probably the most well-recognized mushroom on the market, called a button mushroom, that you can find in the grocery stores. And then how are they fed and how are they grown? We can talk about that in a second. But then you also have all the different specialty mushrooms that a lot of people like to go out in the woods and gather. And why do the button mushrooms have one flavor and the ones that you gather in the woods have different flavors. And then the third problem is there's some in the woods that can grow there, but you can't grow in captivity. And so the questions are why. So going to the button mushroom to start with, and there's a few other types. I think portobellos and a few others are also grown the same way. But generally speaking, those mushrooms have a manure-based food source, and they'd like to grow in caves or in dark environments. And so that's the perception that all mushrooms are grown that way. And the challenge that we have with that type of a growing system and those types of mushrooms, which cause a percentage of the population not to like mushrooms at all, is that they have a very earthy flavor to them, and they get sloppy when you saute them. They get people call them slimy or wiggly or rubbery or whatever it is. But these are things that drive people away from enjoying mushrooms. And then another thing that we mushroom growers need to start sharing to the public, because it's not shared by anybody else, is that you shouldn't be eating any mushrooms raw, even the ones that you find at salad bars or restaurants and things, because the mushroom has a cell wall that's stronger than our bodies can digest. And so we as the farmers, we as the food producers want this food to give people nutrition. And when the nutritional value is lost because our bodies can't digest it, then we have to encourage them how to solve that problem. And just by sauteing the mushrooms slightly, 7 to 10 minutes, then you break that cell wall problem, and then you get a chance to digest it. Now, also, there's a small fact about that cell wall integrity that, and I don't know who, but I'm sure there's somebody on the planet that eats more raw mushrooms than they should, and they can actually hurt their liver if they eat too many of them. And so again, we just have this slight responsibility to be able to go out and just articulate this idea. And so then the question is, how do you eat a mushroom in a salad? Because you want them cold. Well, you saute them the day before, put them in the fridge, and then put them on your salad the next day. And then you solve all those problems. You get the wonderful taste of mushrooms, and you get the nutritional value, and you get them on your salad. So all those different problems are solved at the same time. So we can go to the next slide. No, there you go. So then you got to also think outside the box when you're doing these different things. And so one of the mushrooms that are available in the woods that people can gather, and if you want to go gather your own mushrooms, you do have to get a license to do that. You have to go through identification classes. I'm not 100% certain how often or how frequently you have to be refreshed on those things, but I personally don't have enough time to go to those classes, and so I'm going to choose to grow the varieties of mushrooms that I know are guaranteed to be that variety. But then when you go out and present the mushrooms to the world, people ask you, well, where can I get morels from you? Or why can't you grow morels? They're delicious. They're just, there's this craze, at least here in Minnesota, there's a craze about morels. Well, morels grow in a different type of growing environment than what we can mimic indoors. There is a company in the Netherlands that is developing a system to grow morels in captivity, if you will. They just haven't put a price in their system yet because they don't know the value they have there. And so whether I want to invest in that or not, it'll be a discussion that I'll have with myself when that finally becomes available. But when you're thinking outside the box and you run into regulations, or you run into problems and everything else, you just have to be able to come up with different solutions. And the solutions that we all find are unique to our individual systems. And so for me, when I started growing mushrooms here, I said, I need a spot to grow them. I don't have a clean, sterile spot. So I had a neighbor, a friend who had a building that he wasn't using. I started working there. And then when I finally got things mastered and got things cleaned up here on my side, we stopped having chickens on our farm and we had this empty building. And so I cleaned up the chicken barn, and that's what I now grow my mushrooms in. But one of the things that you have to think about in growing mushrooms is what does a mushroom need? How hard is it to grow mushrooms? So we can go to the next slide. And so I grow all my mushrooms in these plastic bags. And so the plastic bag has the substrate in it. So the substrate that I'm using is the substrate that most of the mushrooms that are found in the wild grow in, and that's a wood-based substrate. And so again, when you're deciding which mushrooms you want, you got to figure out that variety of mushroom. Button mushrooms eat manure. Lion's mate eats wood, and some of them eat ash only, some eat oak only, all these different woods. And so those are investigative tools that you have to go through or research yourself based upon the variety of mushroom you're most interested in growing. And so then there are some mushrooms that are medicinal mushrooms. I grow lion's mane mushroom, for example, which has got some health benefits to it. Shiitakes have some health benefits to it. Reishi has some health benefits to it. And so when you're developing your decisions about how to grow, what to grow, you want to also decide, what am I trying to accomplish here? And so if it's very highly important to you to have nutritional things go out of your farm, go out of your location to feed people with, or if you use them in a medical environment, holistically, or however else they're used, or if you want to take lion's mane, for example, and powder it and mix it in with creamer that you can buy commercially today to have it in your coffee so you can dose yourself daily and all those other types of things, or if you want to make them in your capsules, all these different choices you have to make, and we could be here for 3 weeks talking about all these different options. And so basically you have to decide what you want. And so I grow things with I take hardwood pellets and I add water to them so they turn into sawdust. I add some soybean hulls to them, and then I put the spawn in the bag, and then the bag gets closed up for about 5 months or so. It has a breathing tube, and I'm skipping over several things, but we get to this when we're ready to start fruiting. So going backwards. So we have, how do you make spawn? Spawn comes from the spores that come from mushrooms. So if you've ever had a mushroom on a table or on a plate or something like that and let it sit there for a couple of hours, so you see this white dust, if you will, on the plate. Now those are spores. Spores in a sterile environment can be added to grain or other ingredients to become spawn. And basically all you're doing is, in the plant world, you're creating the seed for the mushroom plant to start with. And so once you have your spawn and all these different things, the spawn, the mediums, the bags, all these different components, depending upon where you want to start or where you want to learn how much of a sterile environment you have, and all those things are available through different organizations throughout the country. The two people that I work with here in the Midwest, one company is in Wisconsin called Field and Forest, and the other company is here in Minneapolis called R&R Cultivation. Both of them grow mushrooms. Both of them have dedicated their lives to that. Both of them are great resources. And so again, when I run into a problem, or when I run into, I want to do the next step, those are the people I go to ask questions to. And so for you and your environment, your areas, you're going to find some resources to be able, and you're welcome to contact these folks. They can ship things to you and you can get things from them. That's no problem at all if you want to use them, or if you have your own sources, those are people that you can go back and ask questions about. Because again, I don't know what part of the country we're talking to, and everybody has different environments and different issues. So, but once you get your spawn, then you're ready to inoculate. And then once you inoculate, this white bag, inside that bag is the mycelium. And so what we have to think about mushrooms are as fruit for us to consume. They're not really the plant. We have to grow the plant first, and that's what's in this bag. And then once it's in this bag, then we cut slits in the bag, and then the fruit comes out. In the world of shiitakes, you have to take the bag off because they fruit everywhere. So there's, again, some procedural things that you have to learn. But also you can inoculate logs if you want to. And logs are great. You can plug them and all those other types of things. You can use ironwood, you can use oak, you can use lots of different hardwoods to do that with. And then the log is supposed to be between 4 inches and 6 inches in diameter. And you basically drill holes on four quarters around it. You put the plugs in, or you put the spawn in, put wax over it, and then you let the log sit and inoculate. The two challenges that I ran into is, one, I'm impatient and I want to get mushrooms to my customers quickly. And so the bags will inoculate in 5 to 7 months. The logs will inoculate in about 18 months. The bags will produce for about 3 or 4 months. The logs will produce for about 3 years. So there's trade-offs, agreed. When you're inoculating a log and you allow it to fruit, and then you harvest that fruit, the other thing you have to do to the log each time is submerge it and re-moisten the entire wood structure inside. And then again, you go through the fruiting process and those type of things. But in that 18-month period of time that you've plugged your log and before it starts inoculating, or it's fully inoculated and starts fruiting, is you have rodents and predator problems that like to come and eat that spawn out of there. And so mice and those type of things will come around your logs. And I don't know about you, but I've worked with friends that do logs and they have this wooded area, and how they keep the predators out of it, I don't know. I didn't ask. It's just I spent all day doing plugging once, and I said, nah, it's really not for me. And so the bags work well for me. But again, sterile environments is very important, because even in these bags, once you have them sterile, once they get inoculated, and once you got the slits and they start to fruit, then you can get all sorts of contaminants through the air that'll bring mold and different types of things in these. So every time you're looking at your mushrooms, and you really only have to look at them like once a day, and you're not spending a lot of time because things aren't changing them much, but you can start to see some changes. Let's go to the next slide, please. Anyway, and so one of the things that you note, and what I'm showing here, is what happens when you don't have all your environments right, because the several things that mushrooms need to grow, forced environment type mushrooms need to grow, is they need to have a very steady temperature. The varieties of mushrooms I grow need between 55 and 75 degrees constantly. They also need an awful lot of humidity, and so the humidity in my barn needs to be between 95 and 99%. And then the problem, what I'm showing you here, is if you don't get rid of the carbon dioxide, because mushrooms do breathe like we do, and since you have a large quantity of them in a very small space, you get a high concentration of carbon dioxide, and so then the mushrooms distort. And so you can go to the next slide, please. And so you have to take that carbon dioxide out of the environment and bring in fresh air. And so bringing in fresh air has the potential of all the different molds and things that are out in the air in the world around you. So you have to put HEPA filters in and those type of things. And then once you get all these different things squared away, the only other thing you have to think about if you're in an enclosed building is, again, they grow on the forest floor, and so they like to have light. So they have mine have 12 hours of light and 12 hours off type thing. It's simpler to set the timer up that way, and then trying to figure out how to adjust it each month type thing. Anyway, but when you do get all these different environments right, you cut the slits, then they start to fruit. And that's what you're seeing here on the screen now, is some oyster mushrooms starting to fruit out. And they start out really small, and in a few days they get to be about this size here, and you're ready to harvest. And then you're able to take the different clusters that you have, harvest them. You've grown them in a clean environment, so there's nothing on there to wash off. Now, there are people that have to wash everything on the planet. Okay, that's fine. The problem with washing mushrooms, though, is the gills underneath the petals will hold the water. And if you get that wet and then you try to dry it, you won't get all the water out of there. And then when you go to saute it, then they're soggy and they don't taste right. And so, pardon me. Each of the different oyster mushrooms, there's 20 varieties, have different flavors and different uses. And so they're exciting. But most of them are the foundation for mushroom soup. Your shiitakes are great for sauteing and putting on proteins and putting them in soups and stews, and or just eating straight. And so all these different things have different flavors, different reasons to put them on your plate. You can make different meals out of them. This particular gray dove oyster mushroom that you see here in the picture, I had a vegetarian come to dinner one day, and we took wild rice and we let the hot wild rice, cook these and mixed these in. Everybody else at the table thought I put chicken in the wild rice. And the person who was a vegetarian knew that it was all plant-based, so they were happy. And so there's many, many different reasons why you want to grow mushrooms. And then when you do things organically, again, you're just opening the door to other concerns, answer other people's concerns. The public today is very much into health. You can go to the next slide, that's fine. Because then you could also get prize mushrooms. That's one mushroom in one hand, and you can see the grass and ground underneath it. So so they do grow quite nice, quite large. And I've had people want to take my clusters of mushrooms home and shellac them and put them on the mantle because they look so pretty and they're so artful. But that's fine. So next slide, please. So then you have to really, and this is my last slide here that we want Maggie to work Morgan, you don't have to worry anymore. But it's you got to figure out what you want to do and what is your purpose. And each of those things are individualized in a webinars. I hit everything with a shotgun. We have new regulations that the organic world is having to deal with as of March 21st of this year. And they have to be complied by March 22nd and 27th. So we have 2 years if we're doing things wrong. But as I review these, the mushroom substrate competition, composting, sourcing of the spawn, certification processes, all these different things, none of these things surprise me at all when you think organically. So the question then becomes, like another thing that I dealt with last year is there's now new regulations about when I'm wholesaling a organic crop to somebody and I'm invoicing them. On my invoice, I have to write that this is organic asparagus or organic radishes or whatever I'm selling. And it has to be written on the invoice because of somebody somewhere on the planet was caught selling conventional grain, I think it was, organically. And then when he was his feet were held to the fire, he said, well, you don't have any written proof that I didn't say this was organic or not. And so they said, oh, okay, so now you're going to play that game. We're going to add this new regulation to it. And so the same thing happens here. In growing organic vegetables, you have to have your organic seed. In growing organic mushrooms, you have to have organic spawn. Now, there are exceptions, all these different things, in the sense that if you want to grow a particular variety of something and nobody on the planet has organic spawn or organic seed to it, then there's a procedure of how you can go about getting that into your system that you want to grow and then having it be certified later after you do your due diligence. In growing in seeds in the vegetable world, you need to be able to contact 3 different suppliers looking for that seed organically and exhaust a thorough investigation of where to find them. And then when you can't, you can document that. And in organics, documentation is everything. I've been told inspector after inspector after inspector, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. I don't care if you say it happened. If it's not written down, it doesn't happen. And so if organics has any problem at all, is they're really paper intensive. But that's a problem that I think I'll swallow because of all of the wonderful joys that you get out of organic production. And so you get all these different documentation that you have to put down, and you follow the rules, and then it's really easy to abide by any of the new changes that come. These changes that are coming are because of the increased value of organic items. There are people that sit in their desk all day long every day saying, okay, what corners can I cut? How can I get to this accomplishment the cheapest, the fastest, the easiest, the least work, or whatever the right phrase is? And that's the wrong way to think. The right way to think about this is that you're in this production, you're a professional, and so let's do things above board. Let's do things to the status quo. Let's meet and exceed our customers' expectations about what they're getting, and let's be very productive at this. And then all of the other consequences along, come into, you have a great product, then people find you. I have a current problem, then I don't know if it's considered a problem or not, but there are more people that know me than I know them. And so I was at an event a couple of days ago and people said, well, weren't you here and aren't you there? And it's like, yeah, I was there several years ago. And anyway, so when you present yourself with your product to the industry and you have all the confidence in the world that you've done everything in your power to be able to meet all of the standards and be able to provide what you're saying you're providing and not trying to circumvent the system with something else, then you have no problem with these new regulations. You have no problem abiding by these standards, and no problem at all, because you're doing it anyway. And then again, what materials you need to use or how you want to build your structure and everything else is completely up to you. In my operation here, I went and reused a chicken coop. And so I visited many different guys growing mushrooms and what they did and everything else. And I had a unique situation in the sense that I'm reusing a space that my grandfather had a different building on. So I had concrete foundations and all sorts of other things on the floor that the chickens didn't mind stepping on and working around and everything else. But it's really hard to navigate and do the mushroom production there. So I actually built a deck over the top of my entire ground inside my building. And the advantage of carbon dioxide versus oxygen is that's heavier than oxygen, so it'll sink. And so it goes below the deck. I have a air exchange system underneath the deck that pulls everything out from under the deck, and then I have fresh air coming in on top. And so I've solved my air circulation problem and my personal problem of being able to move around, or human issue, where other people don't have that luxury, don't have that obstacle, whatever else. And so everybody's situation is unique. If anybody has a question, please do put it in the chat, because we have somebody graciously wanting to monitor all that, and I'll be happy to address any individual questions as I can. This general information is really what I'm trying to accomplish most. So I pretty much finished everything I have to share, and we'd leave plenty of time for questions. So anybody have any questions that I can address?
Yes, so feel free to put your questions in the chat and Q&A. Like I said, I'm also going to go through and allow all the participants to talk if you prefer to just unmute and ask your question. And then Angela, if you have anything to add on the regulation side, now would be a good time too.
Hey, Morgan. Yeah, I don't have anything in particular to add right now. If anybody has any specific questions, I'll be happy to see if I can chime in.
And Dan, who is your certifier?
My certifier is MOSA. I'll quickly, since everybody's still trying to figure out a question to ask, which is fine. My particular problem with organic certification was back in 1978 when I started farming. I had a single question about how do you fertilize, how do you get nutritional value in the food that you're creating? And so in the plant world, NO3 is a particular nitrogen molecule on the planet Earth that the plant uses a lot. And so I had questions from 1978 until 2009 of why does a plant care where this NO3 molecule comes from? And it wasn't until 2009 when I went to a class about the soil web talking about the biology in the soil that the answer is the plant doesn't, but the biology does. And since back in 70s when I was in college, my soil science teacher didn't know or didn't explain or didn't talk about that the plants and the biology interact with each other, and they feed each other and they take care of each other. And they're actually interested in each other's lives. And so back in the 70s, I was told the only way to fertilize things organically is putting manure on knee-high tall giraffe, which is a lot. And just for fun, to be able to put 1 inch of anything on an acre of land equals 130 dump truck loads of whatever that is. And so go knee-high to a tall giraffe, there's more dump trucks than I can afford. And he said you had to do that every year. And it's like, okay, thank you. That's not sustainable. Can't do that. But anyway, so in 2009, I was introduced to the soil web, which is the biology that's in the soil. And the interesting, fun thing about the biology is if you take a teaspoon of living soil and actually go through a microscope and count all the living entities in that teaspoon of soil, you'll find more entities there than human beings on the planet Earth today. Pretty amazing. And then if you take a cupful, you'll find more entities there than human beings ever on the planet Earth added all together. So there's a lot, and they do an awful lot of work. They also have very, very short lifespans. And so they're constantly being born, doing their work, and dying within very short periods of time. And so taking bacteria, for example, anybody who's ever been into any college or any chemistry class of any type and looked through a microscope and looked at a bacteria, you know how small they are. And so in your mind's eye, if you could control the number of bacteria that multiply in a period of time and put enough of them together, shoulder to shoulder and nose to tail only, one layer thick, how long would it take to cover the surface of the earth with one layer of bacteria? The answer to that question is 36 hours because they're so rapid and so multiply so quickly. And so the good news with that, especially for us here in cold country where we have this season called winter that puts this blanket of white stuff on the ground that many of us enjoy, is how do you keep the biology alive through all that winter time? And so the bacteria keep that, there's a layer of actual water that's between the snow and the soil that where the bacteria generally live through winter time. And so they're going through that dying and reproducing cycle all through the winter there, as long as there's a food source there. Otherwise, they disseminate themselves down to where it's 55 degrees in the soil, about 4 or 5 feet down. So then what that does for us, though, as a farmer, as a person that depends upon these different nutrients and things to grow crops, mushrooms included, is that it's readily available when we want it there. Where the conventional guys, they have fertilizers and things that they put on the soil, and here in Minnesota, they put anhydrous ammonia out on the fields in fall. And it's a puzzle to me of why they do that and everything else, but their co-op says to do it, and so the farmers do, because the co-op knows everything, right? Well, it's our job to know things, and we need to tell the co-op what we want, but that's a different subject for a different day. Anyway, so they're putting this anhydrous on, and we have this thing called winter, and ammonia and water like to attract to each other. And then what happens in the spring is we have more water, and then all of a sudden it moves into the soil, and it's no longer around the planting zone. Now, I don't know what the exact numbers are. I'm just going to use this as an example, is that if we have $100 per acre of anhydrous ammonia put on a field to be able to get nitrogen for the spring, and winter steals 70% of that, just to pick a number, and I'm probably wrong, but then I don't know many people that are willing to put $100 bill on the table to get $30 back every year. That just doesn't make any sense. We have a question in the chat.
Yeah, so they're asking, can you say again the contracts and sources that you like, and also do you worry about a sterile environment when you're inoculating in the logs outdoors, or is that more for when you're using the bags?
Okay, so let's answer the second question first. The sterile environment is only for the bags because of it enclosed intense space. Your logs, yes, you need to have your drills and your drill bits and those type of things sterilized every once in a while, and that's simple. You have a jar that has some bleach and some water in it, and you dip your drill bit in there about every 15 or 20th drill, and you're just keeping yourself clean that way. And that's generally, all of us can think about living cleanly and everything else. And so when you're inoculating logs, it's done outside. You're drilling into it. You're putting the spawn in there. You're putting wax over the top of it, and you're going to the next one. You're going to the next one. You're going to the next one. You're working as fast as you can because you don't have that much time. But when you're in a lab environment, you're going from the spores to the spawn, which is the biggest area of contamination you can get, is you can't see what you can't see. Everything is so small, or everything looks the same, that unless you're sure that everything is clean and contamination free, then you won't learn about the contamination until when you try to get your fruiting done later. And so then you've wasted half a year, a full year worth of time and production to discover your batch is spoiled. And so the sterilization is more in the world of in the bag production because of the intensity that it has and the likelihood that something's going to get into this where the log has, the bark and a few other things on it that helps protect it. The two sources that I use are Field and Forest Products in Wisconsin and R&R Cultivation in Minneapolis. Both of them have websites, productions. You can look them up, and feel free to send them an email. You don't need to tell them that I told you. You're welcome to if you want to, but you don't need to, because the person who answers your email probably isn't the person I work with. So the likelihood of everybody there knowing me is odd. Anyway, but again, the reason you want to have pardon me, sources is just so that you have people to talk to. Next question.
Can you talk more about the growing media and the organic regulations for that?
Sure. So the growing media is something that you work with your certifier on to get approved. And so how you get your growing media, there's lots of ways you can get that. Like I have 7 acres of woods here on my farm that I could go harvest my own trees, and I could grind them into my own sawdust. And then I could put them in the bags and everything else, and all that would be certified under my regulations with my certifier. Because every year the inspector comes out and I say, see this spot here? This is field 7 where my woods are certified, and this is where I got the tree, and it grounded here, and on and on. So, or you find a source of hardwood pellets, which I heat my house with hardwood pellets, so I have them here all the time. And then I sent that into my certifier, and every certifier is different. I work with MOSA out of Wisconsin. They're a wonderful company. They do a lot more work than some of the others do. Some of the other certifiers require you to do all this due diligence work. But anyway, then they come back and say, yep, you can use that. And then it's done. And then they watch to make sure if things change, then they notify me saying, I can't use that. And then getting organic soybean hulls is simple and straightforward. You just have to have a bin to store them in, because that's not something that comes in bag form. And so those are what we use to be able to make the bags with that we grow our mushrooms in. If I didn't answer your question, please ask again.
Can we change a little bit from production to the harvesting and post-harvesting? Can you talk a little bit about your harvesting techniques, how you store and pack the mushrooms, just to make sure that you're complying with the organic regulations while also maintaining the integrity of your mushrooms?
So mushrooms will, post-harvest, will survive well within 5 to 7 days. And so generally speaking, when I'm harvesting my mushrooms, I'm taking them to my market the next day. And so in the pictures I showed, some of the mushrooms get bigger than others and those type of things. And so you can, in the pinning process through when you harvest, it's a 4 or 5 day window of time, and you can pick any of those days to harvest things with. It's just what size mushrooms do you want. And so when we harvest them, we have a tray that's clean, and we're going to each of those different blocks, and we just grab the whole cluster and we just pick it up and put it in the tray. And then on the back side of that is some wood pulp and things that needs to be trimmed off, either by us or by the customer. And then we have them in a breathable, spaced, or covered environment that we put in our walk-in cooler. And we keep our walk-in cooler at 34 degrees, and then it stays there for the time that it takes until we can sell it. If we get close to our 5 to 7 day window with what we have in our cooler, then we will dry it, or we will grind it, and we will do other things with it to make some value-added products. But the harvesting is pretty straightforward. Again, shiitakes are different than oysters, for example. Shiitakes, you take the plastic bag off the entire block, you set the block on your bench or your table or whatever you're working with. And then if I have serrated tables, things, so I have shiitakes that grow down between them. And so I go to pull the block to pull it off, and they're stuck there because one's growing through the bottom. You have to take your knife and cut that one off before you can move the block. And then you take a knife and you're cutting each individual one. And so shiitakes are a little bit more work to grow than oysters are, because again, oysters, you're just cutting little slits in your bag and then lifting up that entire cluster and setting it down and ready to go. And those clusters can range anywhere from a few ounces to a few pounds per cluster.
Thank you for explaining that. Another question in the chat is, can you talk about more about how you reduce contamination during production?
It's the filters that you use. So when we're bringing fresh air into our building, those all have HEPA filters in them. Once you're inside the environment that the mushrooms grow in, it's all uniform. It's all been sterilized ahead of time. And so one thing I did miss, I'm sorry, is when you finally do harvest everything out of your production, then all the blocks are done and used and expended or have gotten contaminated. then you have to go through and you have to wash things down. And so we have a Sanidate product. It's a sterilization product that's found for organic washing and that type of stuff. That will wash the walls down, we'll wash our shelves down, and we'll, you know, start afresh, start anew in that particular room that the mushrooms are before we bring the next flush of blocks into that room. And so it's a constant problem. One of the things I like about mushrooms is that it's probably only about 20 hours a week that I have to really focus on the mushrooms at all, because that I don't need to attend to them every day. I got plants growing in my greenhouse that I need to attend to every day because they're absorbing all the water. The heat that's in there evaporates all the water. And so if I don't water the next day, then those plants don't continue. But the mushrooms are in this humid environment. They're doing their thing. They're going along. I can get out there and look through and look at each of the blocks individually and say, okay, these are starting to pin. And so then, you know, you need to focus on this shelf next week more, or tomorrow more than you were. And or these are about done, so we're going to take these out. And so it's a procedure, it's a routine that you jump into. And but it's all about just keeping things clean from the beginning. And then going through the door is an area where you can have contamination. So you just got to make sure that the area outside your building, when you come into your entranceway, has got a clean environment ahead of it. And if you find anything molding or anything that's, you know, was deteriorating outside you, then that's something you probably want to just clean away from your windows or your building, so it doesn't come in through your door. Not my building has no windows in it, so I don't have any other way of getting contaminations in it other than through this fresh air supply that we have. Next question.
As all the ones in the chat at the moment.
Thank you for the great questions, guys.
Thank you for sharing. Oh. There is no other questions. We can wrap up a few minutes early. Some thank yous and for your knowledge in the chat. For the participants, as you exit the webinar, there's going to be a survey that pops up in your browser, or if you're watching this later, it's in the caption of the video. If you all could take a few minutes to just pop your answers in there, we would really appreciate it as we continue scheduling these different webinars and for our grant reporting.